We have a search method hooked up to our application, but we actually want that method to pull up some data. To grab out information about artists, we'll use the awesome Spotify public API. Go ahead and navigate to a new browser or tab and search Spotify API. You should see one of the first links as Web API Spotify Developer. You'll want to find their endpoint reference under Web API, API Endpoint Reference. Then, find the search feature. As you can see, the search for an item endpoint allows us to simply get Spotify catalog information about artists, albums, tracks, or playlists that match a query that we search. Luckily, to use this endpoint, we don't need an API key, so we can go ahead and just copy this link for now to already start using it. We don't need the get part. And go ahead and paste it within your search function. Great. Now let's declare this URL as a base URL. Now let's explore the Spotify API for a few moments. As you can see, they have query parameters. APIs will typically have parameters for each of their endpoints to allow us to specify the type of information that we want. If you've ever noticed, links that you use sometimes have keys or words before an equal sign that maps to a value. That's to specify the exact information that the web application should show on the page. Endpoints work in the same manner. For Spotify's search feature, we specify our query or the word that we're searching by using the Q key. So we can use Q equals Frank Sinatra, for example. So let's declare a new fetch URL. And we'll say it's equal to the base URL plus Q equals whatever the state of our query is. We'll also want to take advantage of some more parameters. For example, the type and the limit. I also want to have our type limited to only artists. So to add a second parameter, we need this and sign, and we'll say type equals artist. And one more parameter, our limit will be one artist for now. Before we do anything else, let's console.log this fetch URL to see what it looks like. I'll save. Go ahead and navigate back to your application. And you actually don't need braces. You guys probably caught that in reference to the variable. We'll save and reload. And there, everything's working fine. So let's look up Frank Sinatra. Now, as I see this URL, I notice there's one thing missing. Before the Q sign, we actually want to have a question mark. The question mark initializes query parameters to come after it, so it's very important. I'm going to save this now. And let's look up Frank Sinatra once more. Here we have our actual fetch URL. Go to new browser or tab, paste it in, and there you go. Here's a lot of information about Frank Sinatra. He has external URLs, his number of followers, the genres that he does, some images about him so we can have some profiles. It's this huge JSON object that Spotify allows us to use within our application. Finally, before we move on, we can make this fetch URL code more concise by taking advantage of template strings in ES6 JavaScript. Rather than using plus signs or plus equal signs more and more, we can keep this whole thing very nice in one string by wrapping it in backticks. So let's say instead that we have this whole thing in backticks. And this character is right next to the 1 key on the keyboard. And all of our variables will be wrapped in braces, preceded by a $sign. And as you can see, our variable is now highlighted in a different color. And now we don't need the plus or the quotation marks anymore. So here we have another variable. And we can get rid of those unnecessary characters now. So as you can see, ES6 allows us to have more concise strings with template strings. It's really up to you, your preference, to use whichever one, but just know more and more template strings will start showing up in the JavaScript code that you see in the future. Let's test it all one more time. I'll save this, go back to the React application, and let's search the Beatles. Here's our fetch URL for the Beatles. And there we go. We have another JSON object. They're known for British Invasion, classic rock, Mercy Beat, protopunk, psychedelic rock, and rock. Great, it still works. So let's move on to the next section where we actually implement some code to grab the data in React.